I'd like to call this meeting of Senate Finance to order. And Mr. Thorley, would you please take the roll?
Senator Dennis, Senator Kikefer, Senator Goycochea, Senator Hammond, Senator Ratty, Senator Severs-Ganser, Senator Cannizzaro, Senator Dondero Loop, Chair Brooks.
Here, and we have a quorum, and please mark the other members present as they arrive. We have just on our agenda today, first of all, we will hear this bill, and then we'll take a recess, and then we'll be coming back later today with some other bills once we get a new a revised agenda. But first, we're going to hear Senate Bill 267 that was brought by Senator Spearman, and it establishes provisions relating to the collection and reporting of information concerning diversity and equality in the workplace. And welcome, Senator Spearman. And there is a amendment to this bill, and we believe the amendment to this bill will remove the fiscal notes and the fiscal impact on this to the state. But let me make sure that we have the right amendment listed. Give us 1 second, Senator Spearman.
Mr. Chair, on Nellis, there's an amendment mock-up, proposed amendment 3333 to Senate Bill number 267, dated May 24th. There's also a proposed conceptual amendment dated May 25th. Those are the two exhibits that are currently on Nellis.
Thank you. And so will we be, Senator Spearman, is it your intention that we'll be looking at this bill with both of those amendments adopted, or does one take precedent over the other?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Pat Spearman, representing Senate District 1. So the last amendment is the one that takes taxation out. It's completely voluntary, and everything will be handled by Blackfire, and that's why we have Ms. Jan Jones Blackhurst on with us now. And okay.
All right, thank you. If you would just tell us what the bill does as proposed to be amended, okay, and then talk about both of those amendments briefly, please.
Thank you. Again, I'm Senator Pat Spearman, and I represent Senate District 1 in North Las Vegas. And what this bill is about is looking at diversity. I think we've all heard a lot about how there are becoming more and more women in the workforce, but unfortunately, even though we're in the workforce, we're not always at a place where we're at the decision-making table. What this bill is really about is just trying to check to see how well or not we're doing. And I, for one, think that it's important because taxpayers are paying our salaries, and the people that do the work, I really believe, should represent the taxpayers, represent what the state looks like. So Ms. Jan Jones Blackhurst came to me and talked about a bill when we were great minds work alike, and I hope I haven't insulted you, Jan. But I was thinking about trying to do something like this, and she had it already put together, so wanted to carry the bill. And if I can toss it to her so she can explain exactly where we are right now, taking taxation out, everybody else out. It's going to be voluntary, and it's going to be handled at UNLV.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Ms. Jones Blackhurst.
Jan Jones Blackhurst for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We have proposed a conceptual amendment to this inclusion survey that would be conducted with businesses that qualify for the commerce tax, as well as state and university agencies. It would be a 4-year pilot. The data would be collected by Blackfire, which is a part of the UNLV campus, although it's off campus in the Harry Reid Engineering Park. there would be no financial consequence, as we would be doing all the collecting, and then we will come back with a report to government. The only thing that we would ask is that tax give us access to those companies that do pay the commerce tax, so we can reach out to them. But as I said, it's entirely voluntary. Under a gender equity bill that was passed the last session, the Secretary of State was compiling the data, and that was to sunset in June of 2022. And under the conceptual amendment, it would now sunset in June of 2021. The survey, and it should be attached, is very basic, and what it looks for is representation, pay equity, and policies that are germane to including more women in the workplace.
Thank you. And so you stated that you would need access to who is paying the commerce tax in the state, and then completely outside of the Department of Taxation, you would be reaching out, or the organization that's doing the survey would be reaching
Yes.
out to those companies?
And again, asking them only if they would like to participate. There is no requirement that they have to participate. And the same holds for both governments and the NC system. It's entirely voluntary. Just from UNLV, we would be reaching out to collect the data and document the research.
Thank you. And before we go to the Department of Taxation, I was going to see if the committee had any questions. Senator Senator Dondero Liu.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Ms. Jones, Blackhurst.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I have a question, but I just have to make a comment. I can't imagine how excited my mother would be. So those in this room that know her or knew her would agree. So that I just had to make that comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Senator Sievers-Gansert.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. So I'm looking at Section 6.2, which has the components of the survey, and it's extremely comprehensive. And the way that the amendment is written, it basically says that you have to include everything in that survey. And given that it's voluntary, I'm not sure if you're going to get a lot of responses because it's so comprehensive. You have to have somebody in personnel or someone at a very high level to be able to fill this out. And so I guess a couple of things is I want you to be able to get as much information as possible, but if you overwhelm them with requests, you're not going to get any information. And then, so when this is submitted, corporations are, so sometimes others don't want to submit because they're not confidential, the information's not confidential. So corporations who put this information out there as maybe their dashboard, it's so comprehensive, I'm not sure that they're going to want to do it because of that as well. So it's because there's so much information, because again, the way that it's written, it looks like it all has to be asked, not a portion of it. And then again, because there's no confidentiality around it, there could be repercussions by them responding to a survey like this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think that
I was just going to.
I think if you look at, I'm sorry, Senator. I was just going to reference the Human Rights Committee Equality Index, which has become the standard for the LGBTQ community. It was always entirely voluntary. Had about the same number of questions. There's only 20, and since they're in broad groups. And what you found is that, and Caesars Entertainment was one of the first companies to receive 100% score. And then companies ran to receive a like score because corporate America always likes to be at the forefront. So again, I think that if we can get, even the beginnings of some forward-thinking companies like Caesars, like MGM, to begin to participate, then I think that others will follow. It is not our intent to look to embarrass anyone. It is only our intent to reward best practices organizations, and the information would only be put together, given to the governor, and at his discretion would any kind of report ever be made public. And 2 years ago, when we passed another iteration of this bill, actually, most of the cities and counties did respond. We just didn't get all of the information compiled because it wasn't clear where the responsibility lay, which is why we thought it was important in this bill that the responsibility be with Blackfire, where I'm the executive director, and I will make sure we follow through.
Thank you. And if I may, excuse me, Senator Pat Spearman, Senate District 1, if I may follow up, one of the things, if you look at the HRC survey, and I'll get the link and send it to you, Mr. Chair, but if you look at that link, the companies that are in the top 100, there's not a company there that is in Nevada that didn't fill out this survey. So this is not new. The other thing that a lot of people may recognize is that many corporations started doing some things to, in light of the green consumer, the growth in that particular demographic. And so people look to these companies, whatever their interest is, they want to find out how friendly are they to not just the LGBTQ community, but that's important too because the LGBTQ community in the U.S. contributes $1.7 billion to our economy. But they also want to know how green a company is. What are they doing in terms of sustainability? Many of them now are starting to want to know how many of them are good places for mothers to work, and you all may have seen those surveys. They want to know where are the good places for women to work. And so there are a number of companies that strive to get on the top 100 of these surveys, and that's all this is. We're not doing anything that is mandatory, but I think for companies, it's really a feather in their cap. There were, I think, close to 1,000 companies that submitted to HRC, and only 100 were selected. And people are scrambling to try to get into that top 100. So the information that's asked on this survey, as a matter of fact, is not even as extensive as some of the questions that are asked on the other surveys, but it's important for people to know. And like I said, as I began, the state is changing, and I think it's important that the people who are paying our salaries know that it's representative of them as well.
Thank you, Senator. And before Senator Hammond has a question, before I go to him, though, Ms. Jones-Blackhurst, you said that the legislature passed something similar a few years ago, and that directed folks to collect information and give information, but we haven't done anything with that information. What about this isn't just going to have us collect more information that we just do nothing with?
I think one of the, Jan Jones-Blackhurst for the record, Mr. Chairman. I think one of the problems with the first iteration, it was posted on Silver Plume. It was difficult for businesses to access. The way that the data came together, no one was really responsible to collect it. There wasn't a fiscal note, so the Secretary of State didn't have the resource to put it together. It hadn't been assigned deliberately to any other agency, which is why we were very clear in this piece of legislation that UNLV is the owner of both the survey, the collection of the data, and the reporting back to the state of the data.
Thank you. And so UNLV through the foundation or the Blackfire Institute, did I get it correctly? And so
you did.
And that is, so that isn't requiring any state funds. This is a institute outside of the state who says we want to do this thing and we want to collect all this information and then send the report to the state. Is that
correct, Mr.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, because I think you hit the nail on the head. We have
all these, but nobody owned it.
We have a lot of data and we want to collect and all these things we want to know, and then we don't have money to pay for it, so we pass a bill that does nothing, and then we have this data that just doesn't do anything for anyone, and so and we'll continue to do that. And but
Mr. Chairman, I promise
somebody owns this one.
I promise you that will not be the case.
Somebody owns this one.
I will collect the data, and I will report the data back.
I've made it very clear how I feel about studies that do nothing, studies to nowhere, and we have so many of them. But I appreciate that somebody's going to own this. Senator Hammond.
Thank you. I feel like now I'm going to be asking a question after you talk badly about studies. I kind of like studies because it brings data. But the question I have, I looked at the conceptual amendment, and I didn't go through the amendment carefully enough, but in the conceptual amendment, and you may have said it and I didn't catch it, but in the conceptual amendment, it talks about periodic reporting. Sometimes when they say periodic reporting, I don't know exactly what you mean by that. I just wanted to know. I think I understand the mechanics of it, right? We're going to shut down what they're doing with the Secretary of State, then enable UNLV to start up their system, collect enough data. The market does what it does. Senator Spearman just mentioned that when they collect data and they want to get on these lists, markets then, companies adjust their practices because they're trying to capture more of the market, which is exactly what it's been doing for years, hundreds of years. So that's actually good. I just don't know what you meant by periodic reporting to the governor. Did you have are you anticipating, and I hate to get bogged down in the policy, but that just struck me as, I don't know if you're asking them, UNLV, you're going to task them with quarterly reports, yearly reports, once before we go back to session. What are you anticipating there?
Jen Jones Blackhurst for the record. Thank you, Senator Hammond. I'm thinking that probably the first reporting would be at the end of a year, because it'll probably take us that much, and it's a 4-year pilot. So I would see annual reporting to the government. It's probably going to take us that much time to acquire enough data and information to make a comprehensive report meaningful. If we have something before then, it might be earlier, but I would expect it would be at the end of the year, not this year. Once this is passed, the next 12 months.
Awesome. So you're just looking at probably once a year, trying to gather data and send out a report so everybody knows this year this is the top whatever companies in this area. Okay, thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Senator Pat Spearman, Senator District 1, if I might say this as well. As we're coming back out of the pandemic and we're looking at diversifying our economy, it's indexes like these that many corporations look to see if their workforce is going to fit into that state. And so this can only help us as we're talking about diversifying economy and opening up our doors to more and more corporations coming in that can help us with the comeback.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the Department of Taxation? Senator Kikefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Ms. Young, good to see you. So I have a few questions. One is is a business's status as a payer of the commerce tax currently considered confidential?
Thank you, Senator Kikefer. Melanie Young, Executive Director for the Nevada Department of Taxation. We look under NRS 360.255 as all of our taxpayer records are confidential. So when we worked with Senator Spearman and others on this bill, that was a concern of ours. And so as long as the provisions allow for the department to release this information, what we would be only releasing, in our opinion, is the taxpayer's contact information. So it would be like the taxpayer's name, address, an email if we have that information.
Thank you. So, and that would just be the business name, not an individual contact necessarily?
Thank you, Senator Kikefer, for the question. Melanie Young, Executive Director for the record. Yes, it would just be the business name and their address and email.
Okay, thank you. Is there, how many current commerce taxpayers are there?
Thank you, Melanie Young, Executive Director. Again, thank you, Senator Kikefer, for the question. Currently, we have over 200,000 taxpayers registered under commerce tax, but on average, annually, about 7,000 pay. So back in last legislative session, we did pass the bill that not every business had to remit. But what we ended up finding is not every business closed down their taxpayer account because maybe they were close to that threshold and they might not pay this year, but they may next year. So keeping their taxpayer records open. So we would provide that information to this group to be able to do their survey.
So just for the 7,000, not the 200,000, right? How many of those are in-state versus out-of-state?
Thank Thank you for the question, Melanie Young, Executive Director for the record. I do not have that information at my fingertips, but I could provide that to you.
I'd appreciate that. I mean, when we passed the commerce tax, one of the main ideas was to find a way to tax out-of-state big businesses that were doing business in the state. You know, we created that nexus. So I think it would be an interesting data point. So, and maybe this is a question better placed to Ms. Jones-Blackhurst. Instead, well, I guess why did you decide the commerce tax was the trigger for this, as compared to something like number of employees or something like that was not traditionally confidential? I mean, you could just pull that stuff down directly from Dieter.
Yeah, Jen Jones-Blackhurst for the record. Thank you, Senator, for the question. Originally, in the first iteration, we were only looking at companies that employed in excess of 500. That would probably still be our standard. When we went to tax, we thought that aligning it with the commerce tax would allow us to look at that 500 and above in a more deliberative fashion. But that's still our intent. We're not looking to go into small business unless they choose, unless they'd like to participate.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? And so the providing, and my questions for the Department of Taxation, the sharing of that information, do you feel that creates additional needs for resources, or is that a relatively easy thing to do?
Thank you, Senator Brooks, for the question. Melanie Young, Executive Director for the record. With this amendment that is proposed by Senator Spearman, we feel that is a resource we can provide within our current resources. It would be providing them with a list for them to be able to do their survey. It no longer requires us to administer the survey, to review, redact, or report on that.
Thank you. And I have a question from Senator Kikefer as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm caught up on providing an exemption to the confidentiality of some of our taxpayer records. We hold that really tight, and for good reason. So I'm wondering if there's any, and oftentimes when we do data sharing requirements, that confidentiality is waived for that sort of initial transfer, but is not extended out further, right? So that if we were to provide a list of commerce taxpayers to Blackfire, that they would then still have to hold those records in full confidence and couldn't share them with anyone. I mean, is that how you envision it, Ms. Young or Senator? I don't, what I don't want to do is start telling the public who's grossing $4 million and who's not. I don't think that's appropriate.
Yeah, Jan Jones-Blackhurst for the record. Senator, that would certainly be our intent, to keep it entirely confidential. We don't intend to share any of this with the public. And as we said, we would only reach out to a company asking them if they would like to participate. They're under no obligation to participate if it's not in their interest.
That just may require some language in the bill, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
And is that confidentiality provision addressed at all in the bill or the amendment of the proposed amendment or the mock-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Pat Sperman, representing Senate District 1. It's not addressed explicitly. We can do that, but it's voluntary. If they don't want to participate, they don't have to. And the other thing that I would say, what we're asking for, I guess if you put a couple of students on it, we could find it online, but it's a lot quicker just to find it, with the records that already exist. So it's voluntary. They say we don't want to participate, no problem. And I would also direct the committee's attention to the McKinsey studies. It's a global corporation, and they do surveys like this all of the time with a lot of different corporations. And one of the things that they found in 2020 is that not only does diversity matter, but diversity increases the corporation's bottom line. So again, I say, for most of the corporations, if they were to get a survey like this, they would probably want to do it simply because women represent about 51% of the persons who hold the pocketbook strings. Women are also about 51% that are in the job place. And with the downsizing and the effects of COVID-19, there are going to be more and more women who are laid off, who have to change jobs, and now they've got to go try to find a way to go back to work. These corporations are going to want to appear on a list that says they are friendly. So if you all have time, and I'm sending you all links to the Finance Committee Secretary, that'll show you this isn't anything new. This is something that's already going on. We just haven't done it in Nevada. We haven't done it in Nevada, and so this is a way for us, again, I say, to put together a list that shows corporations who are not here and who would want to locate in a state where they know that their employees are going to have more opportunities. If you look at CVS, there's a woman heading up that. If you look at Walgreens, there's a woman heading up that. And so more and more women are becoming CEOs. And if you think the women who are CEOs aren't concerned about what the climate is for their workers, please think again, because that is probably one of the first and foremost things that they're interested in. If we locate in this state, in any aspect, whether it's the headquarters or whether it's ancillary or whatever, if we locate, what does that look like for our women employees? And so this helps us. And it's not strange to most corporations, especially those who are on the Fortune 500, it's not new to them at all.
Thank you, Senator Spearman. I don't argue that it's not valuable to have that information, and it's definitely valuable to have women leading our businesses or our legislatures in this particular case. But those are voluntary. Those are indexes put together by organizations so that they can serve private industry, so private industry can demonstrate to the consumer why they're good. Those weren't created by pieces of statute, and the sharing of taxpayer information is by all means not voluntary in this bill. The participation in the survey is, and that's what we're asking about. And so, and that's where the concern lies. And so, that I just still don't see anything here that addresses that. We're saying take taxpayer information, share it with a private organization, and do it through a piece of legislation. That's the concern. That's what we're trying to address today.
Mr. Chairman, Dan Jones-Blackers, for the record, we're glad to try to come with additional language that preserves confidentiality for any who choose to report.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Ms. Jones-Blackhurst, and we'll obviously work with our legal staff here just to understand if there's any issues associated with that. And I can't imagine there is. The bill wouldn't have made it past the drafting. So we'll have to make sure that we address that. At least it's on the record. So I appreciate that. Senator Kikefer.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think the commerce tax trigger is actually in a conceptual amendment for the first time. So, but there are examples in statute that we could point to. I know, for example, there's a confidentiality provision in the NRS that allows Department of Taxation to transfer records to our our fiscal analysis division so that they can do revenue projections and things like that. So there are some things in statute that we could probably point to. I just don't know what they are off the top of my head.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the committee for Senator Spearman or for Ms. Jones-Blackhurst? All right. I do not see any. Thank you, Senator Spearman. Appreciate you coming in this morning. And we will go to support for Senate Bill 267 here in the room. And if we could go to support on the phones.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. To testify in support on Senate Bill 267, please press *9 to take your place in the queue. Once again, to testify in support on Senate Bill 267, please press *9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in support at this time.
Thank you. Do we have anyone in opposition to Senate Bill 267?
Thank you, Chair. To testify in opposition on Senate Bill 267, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. Do we have anyone in neutral on Senate Bill 267?
Thank you, Chair. To testify in neutral on Senate Bill 267, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Good morning, Chair and Committee. Jamie Rodriguez, Jamie Rodriguez. I'm the Government Affairs Manager for Washoe County. We are here neutral. We were neutral on the bill, having seen the conceptual amendment this morning. There was one thing that we just wanted to put on the record. Washoe County is more than happy to comply with providing the information we have previously. The one thing that we did want to clarify on the record, depending on obviously how this information is going to be used, is that employees have the option of providing this information. Our gender and ethnicities are optional fields for employees. And so while we're happy to comply with the information, just wanted it on the record that that information may not be 100% accurate of what our employment workforce looks like. What I will say is, as a female and a woman of Hispanic descent, I very much so appreciate the importance of providing that information. And while I personally always provide that information, not all employees feel that that is a value to them to provide. And so we did have that on the record previously when the previous studies were put forward by this body, and we just wanted to put that on the record again. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else here in neutral? And do we have anyone on the phones in neutral?
Thank you, Chair. To testify in neutral on Senate Bill 267, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 137, please press star 6 to unmute. Thank you, caller. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, this is Brandy Harrison for the record. And I think this survey could provide very useful information, only if the data was disaggregated. To my understanding, the language in the bill talks about women of color, but it doesn't talk about which women of color are being hired. And you could get better data if you disaggregated the women of color out into different categories, say Latinos, Blacks, Hispanic, Asian, and so forth. And even in the Black category, if you could disaggregate that out even more as an African, African-American, Somali, Nigerian, and so forth, because we're really not getting a clear picture of what's going on if that data is not disaggregated, because you could hire women of color, but maybe you're only hiring Black women of color, or maybe you're only hiring Asian women of color. So I don't see how the bill can be useful in that way if we're not getting a clear picture of the women who are being hired. And then also, I feel it would be advantageous if men were included in the bill, because if we look at the data for Nevada, Black men and Black women are at the lowest employment rate. So that category has the highest unemployment rate. So it would be advantageous if we could do something for that category in this bill as well to get a better picture of what's really going on. Thank you.
Thank you. And next caller in neutral, please.
Thank you, Chair. To testify in neutral on Senate Bill 267, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no additional callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you. And that is that brings our hearing to Senate Bill 267 to an end. I appreciate you presenting it, Senator Spearman, and I appreciate you joining us this morning, Ms. Jones-Blackhurst. And if we have any questions, we'll be following up after the committee after this hearing to see if we have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, and if we could take just a and thank you for the Department of Taxation and for joining us and answering our questions. So thank we are going to, if we could, take a 5-minute recess, and it's a legit 5 minutes. It's like bathroom coffee 5 minutes, not, and and then we'll come back, and our agenda has been updated, and so we'll take a look at some other bills. Thank you. And that was relatively close to a 5-minute recess. And it's all relative. And so we're going to come back into the meeting, and while we're trying to arrange, we have to make a modification. There was an error in the agenda, and we're going to have to modify that agenda. But we do have a BDR that we need to introduce because we need to get it moving real quick, and we'll be taking a look and walking through that BDR.
So, Mr. Chair, it's not a BDR. It's Senate Bill 459. So this is the BDR, the Authorizations Act BDR.
We introduced it yesterday. Sorry about that.
So it's now in committee as a bill. Again, Senate Bill 459. This is BDR S 1171, which we fiscal staff walked the committee through yesterday. The bill authorizes expenditures by agencies of the state government for the 2021-23 biennium. There were no changes between what was presented in the BDR to what actually made it into the bill as introduced in Senate Bill 459. However, fiscal staff is available to answer any questions if you all have any questions on the Authorizations Act.
Thank you. So on our agenda, we have Senate Bill 459, which authorizes the expenditures by agencies of the state government for 2021-2023 biennium. As Mr. Thorley just stated, this is the BDR that we heard yesterday with no changes. And any questions on Senate Bill 459? All right, seeing none, we'll see if we have anybody in support of Senate Bill 459. And see if we have anybody in support on the phones, please.
Thank you, Chair. The public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Thank you. No callers at all in support or opposition or neutral?
That is correct, sir. There are no callers on the line.
Thank you. And do we have anybody in opposition to Senate Bill 459 here in the audience? Anybody in neutral on Senate Bill 459 here in the audience? All right. Is the staff able to go ahead and work session that right now, or should we, after we close the hearing on Senate Bill 459? Okay, so we're going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 459, and I would like to quickly work session that just because we have to keep these bills moving. And the motion would be do pass. And I've got a motion from Senator Dennis. I got a second from Senator Don Darrow Loop. And any discussion on that motion? Seeing none. All in favor, aye. Any opposed, nay. And so the motion passes unanimously, and we'll assign that floor statement to, I'll take that. And we can now move on to our next agenda item, which is, do you know if we've been joined by the Department of Education?
I believe they're trying to join right now. Deputy Gonzalez will be joining us via Zoom here shortly.
Perfect. Assemblywoman Miller, if you could briefly just walk us through what the bill does, and then we'll address the fiscal note and go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Senate Finance Committee. Assembly Bill 266 basically addresses, our excessive class sizes here in Nevada. There's a couple components where it changes the requirements of who's included in our student-teacher ratios so that we have more accurate information. It also requires that we get some recommendations from the Department of Ed on our other staff that's included for students. That would include social workers, counselors, nurses, and such. But primarily, the part of it that is pertinent to the fiscal note is there is a value-based, I would say, weight that's added to teacher evaluations when they do exceed the recommended class size ratios. And so, not to go too deep into the particulars of that, because it did pass out of both policy committees, but because of that, it does require additional training to the districts and the admin on how to administer that value-based weight. And that is what, in working with the Department of Ed and Deputy Director Gonzalez on this amendment, that is where the fiscal note's coming from. So at that point, I will, if Deputy Director Gonzalez is available, I will let her speak to the reason why there's a fiscal note from the department.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Miller. Before that, though, I do have a question. So this, when it was amended in the Assembly, and that changed it and kind of created that need to do that piece that you're talking about with the Department of Education. So was that to address other fiscal issues, or was that to address policy issues to get to that amendment that created this piece?
The amendment was actually to address a policy piece. The fiscal note from the Department of Ed was created after the amendment, after it passed the Assembly. But the amendment was to address the policy, and of course, by addressing the policy, it created the need for the fiscal note from the department.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Assemblywoman Miller? Senator Dondero-Loop.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Assemblywoman, did I hear you mention nurses? Was that part of the amendment?
No, I believe that might have been part of the original, or the first amendment. There were a few amendments that were given, but that last amendment that brought on the fiscal note was just specifically toward the weights on the evaluation. But nurses were included in originally.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. I know that they were inadvertently left off of Senate Bill 151, and so I was checking to see if they had been included in this bill because I wasn't clear as to whether, and I know that's policy, but I wanted to check on that on the record.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And then the other thing that I wanted to ask you about was with the class size reduction, and this is just one of those, I've been in this position, and so I've got to ask the question. So what would prevent, if I have a principal that knows I'm highly effective and knows that I can handle 5 more kids, knows I'm going to get a great evaluation at the end of the year, what prevents that scenario sort of from happening? In other words, I know you're going to get a great evaluation. We work together fabulously. You're a great teacher. Can you handle 5 more kids? I need 5 more kids somewhere. And I'm like, yeah, I can do that. And so I'm already going to get a great evaluation, right? I'm already going to get that great evaluation. So how does that, I'm just trying to think of it like, how does that balance out?
Well, truthfully, it doesn't, and that's the part that we're not able to address yet in Nevada through policy. There are at least 100 school districts that is part of collective bargaining, where they're able to say, you know, actually cap how many students they have in the class. Here in Nevada, what happens, as you know, is that oftentimes those are the teachers who get those extra 5 kids, or the kids that need the most intensive support, you know, because they have additional needs that they need. So often it is the most effective teachers that are given the additional and the largest class sizes. And so what this bill does is address for teachers as part of the ultimate goal of retention, the fact that because there's also many districts across the country that pay for each student that's in your class additionally. While we're not paying teachers for the extra work that's added for every student, and we can't collectively bargain for it, what it comes down to is still the recognition that for each student, it does add additional work, additional parent contact, additional stress and strain in the classroom for the students as well. You know, students would like their classes smaller as well. So it's just an acknowledgement that, as you say, even for that teacher that we already know is going to do well, but we want to acknowledge if you were to get a 3.2 in a certain category, and you're doing that with 45 students in your class, what would it have been if you had 25 students in your class? And I would just like to add to that this amendment also only addresses those teachers who are already effective and who are off probation.
I appreciate that clarification because I think that's really important, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
And thanks for being a great Assemblywoman in District 5.
Thank you. Well, I have big shoes to follow, so.
Do we have any other
Less
questions?
plugs.
Senator Dennis.
I just want to emphasize the last thing that she said, that, this helps good, effective teachers, but if you're not an effective teacher, this is not going to help you. We're not going to all of a sudden give benefit to a teacher because she's got more kids in her classroom, but she wasn't effective before, and it won't help moving forward, right?
Correct. And Senator, if I may, I think it was also brought up in the Senate Education Committee that, again, this helps us look at that for teachers, there are some teachers that struggle and need additional supports, that maybe we need to be clear about how those classes are loaded and that we shouldn't be giving them the excessive class size.
Senator Severs-Gansert.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. So I was looking at, let's see, it would be Section 1 under 7A, where it's the number of teachers employed full-time. And so I know quite a few people who split classrooms. They share a classroom, so together they're full-time, but individually they're part-time. And so do they count as 0 or 1 or 2?
Well, what's currently happening right now, Senator, and this is Brittany Miller for the record. What's currently happening right now is that when we look at the ratios and the data that's produced, that's publicized, either from particular schools or the district, or even the information that then is given to the state. I know myself, I go through them all the time, and I'm like, where are you getting 1 to 24 from? Because I've got 45 kids in all my classes. So what it is licensed employees includes everyone with a license. So that would be our counselors, our social workers, our librarians, our special ed teachers, all of the people that are licensed, but however, are not actually teaching a class. So therefore, if you divide all of the students in a school divided by all the licensed staff, your averages come out much lower than if you just included those who are actually teaching. So in that case, if they're actual teachers, whether they're splitting a class or co-teaching or whatever, they could still be included in that ratio. They're still individual teachers, because that's the whole point, is if they're sharing, is they are intentionally bringing those class sizes down to give those students that extra attention. It's to eliminate the fact that we have people, licensed teachers or licensed staff in the building, who are not standing in front of a classroom of students and yet being calculated in those calculations, which make it appear lower than it is.
I appreciate your response, but when I read the language, it says you only count full-time. And so it says the number of teachers employed full-time. And so I'm not sure if you're going to get to that number for the exact reason that I just said. So I understand the intent. I'm just not sure if the language reflects that intent. So just a consideration. And then also, I know in higher ed, there are standards, because there's a lot of national data, a lot of reporting that you do, and there's standard definitions for teachers and full-time and so forth. And when you look at our state compared to other states, if you don't use the definitions that are accepted or provided by those organizations, then our data is completely out of whack. So if this is for our internal purposes, sort of the state of Nevada purposes, that makes sense, but would we be using the standard definitions by organizations when we provide the information to these national organizations that provide all these rankings and they look at ratios and those types of things?
Well, I think that would actually be a question for the Department of Ed,
Okay.
since they're the ones that would be publishing that further. So Deputy Gonzalez, if you could answer that.
Good morning, Deputy Gonzalez. Please go ahead if you are available to answer that.
Good morning, Felicia Gonzalez for the record. Could you repeat that question one more time for me, please?
Thank you. So the state of Nevada has some definitions around, it looks like we're sort of changing definitions around who counts in our ratios. But I know that we also provide information to national organizations, and they typically have their own definitions of who counts for what. And I want to, so I'm asking whether we're going to follow the national definitions when we turn in data to those organizations versus how we're now defining who counts for the state of Nevada when we look at ratios.
Deputy Superintendent Gonzalez, for the record, thank you so much for that question. So we do, when we are requested to provide that, the definition for class size ratios, we do provide that to the organizations that do collect that information. So what we will do is we are happy to provide that information to this committee.
So thank you. So the root of my question is we will continue to follow the definitions as provided by the external organizations, so that when we're looking at comparisons state to state, it'll be apples to apples because we'll be using their standardized definitions. But regarding this bill, we're redefining who counts, and so we'll have that information more as internal information for the state of Nevada.
Deputy Superintendent Felicia Gonzalez, for the record, you are absolutely correct. We do have national organizations that ask for different types of data collection regarding ratios and other data, and we go by their definitions at the time that we provide it. This bill does provide for more extensive data to be collected. This is not in alignment with anything that we have had to collect and send out nationally, and so this is going to actually provide a little bit more clear data, as Assemblywoman Miller has described, so that we can get a better grasp of our current landscape here in Nevada.
Can I ask one? And just as a follow-up, kind of going back to the situation when you have individuals sharing a classroom, so you've got two teachers who work part-time to provide full-time instruction to a classroom, how are they counted according to this bill? Because they're both part-time, but they actually provide full-time because there's two of them. Are they zero, are they two, or are they one?
Deputy Superintendent Felicia Gonzalez, for the record, currently when we collect this data, we collect them as a whole.
Even though they're both part-time, because this actually states full-time. I guess I want to make sure they're counted, because this bill says you have to be a full-time in section 1(7)(a), the number of teachers employed full-time. So they're actually not full-time, but you can consolidate that data because two halves make a whole.
Deputy Superintendent Felicia Gonzalez, when the districts report class sizes to us currently, they count those two part-time positions as one for reporting purposes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Dondero Loop.
Thank you very much. And I don't know if this is the exact answer, but I'm going to weigh in here, Deputy and Assemblywoman. When they did the class size reduction originally back in the 90s, I was a teacher, and we ended up as team teachers because they didn't have enough, they didn't count for classrooms when they did that. They counted for kids and teachers, but they didn't count for classrooms. So we didn't have enough classrooms. So I was in a classroom with another team teacher with 32 kids at the time in second grade. We were still both responsible for those 32 kids. So while they may have been able to say that it was 16-1, at the end of the day, we were both responsible for those 32 kids. I've also taught half-time kindergarten at one point for 6 months, and we were both counted as one person because we were both responsible for those kids. So I thought, I don't know if that helps clarify, but I think it's important to understand that it may be kind of two different systems of counting, like how many kids per teacher, but at the end of the day, the teacher is responsible for the children in front of them.
Thank you, and I think that's clear. The language just says full-time, and so that's where you don't count part-time teachers if you're part-time in a classroom, because it's the language of the bill I'm concerned about, to make sure that it actually accurately reflects what's going on. Thank you.
And if I may, Chair Brooks, weigh in on this as well. Senator, one thing I think with this particular question too, it may come down to the districts. I know in the district that I work in, that would be considered one FTE because the option to job share, which I rarely have seen, that option to job share, then we're literally splitting everything that one FTE has. And it's so one person would get the medical insurance, we split the salary, we split the hours, so it's still just considered the one FTE. But again, that's one particular district. I don't know how other districts handle it or would account for.
And therein lies the whole thing, is that every district is different. And in Clark County, you're absolutely right. There are very few job sharing positions anymore. And I would suspect that in small districts, our really small districts, there's none because they wouldn't have the need or the personnel. But I appreciate what you're saying. I just don't read it like that as an educator, so.
All right, thank you. So, Ms. Gonzalez, does the fiscal note submitted, that's unsolicited fiscal note that's listed on our committee page and on the bills page, reflect the bill as it sits here today?
Deputy Superintendent Felicia Gonzalez, for the record, that is correct.
All right, our work here is done. I will go to any other questions for either Ms. Gonzalez or Assemblywoman Miller. Perfect. Thank you, Assemblywoman Miller, and thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Appreciate that. Do we have anybody here in the room in support of Assembly Bill 266?
Good morning, Chair Brooks and committee members. My name is Hava Ahmed, H-A-W-A-H-A-H-M-A-D, and I'm here representing the Clark County Education Association. We are in support of this bill, and we're in the policy committees as well. And we do believe that the value-added approach will give us a lot more clarity on the data, as well as the clarity in the distinctions of how we count our educators and where we publish that information. Additionally, the nurse ratio is also very important to us and our other licensed professionals, as is Senate Bill 151. And we most importantly want to thank everyone on this committee for all of your hard work this session. You put $500 million in education last week, and that was excellent. And we stand here committed to continuing that work to ensure that we continue to work together with the legislature, the governor, mining, and gaming to make sure that all of us have skin in the game to put education, our educators, and our students first. Thank you.
Thank you. And go ahead, Mr. Daly.
Mr. Chairman, Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association. I think everyone here has heard us talk about the issue of class size and Nevada having the largest class size in the country. NSEA has also been engaged in ensuring that teacher evaluations are a fair measure of a teacher's performance. And regarding this fiscal note, I think we need to keep in mind that teachers with overcrowded classrooms have a disadvantage in their evaluation through no fault of their own. And the double whammy of overcrowded class sizes combined with potentially punitive evaluation measures, it's just too much for many educators who end up opting to leave the profession. So I know that there's a $24,000 note on this. The cost of educator turnover and teacher turnover in Nevada obviously is in the, difficult to quantify numbers. So we think this is a worthy expenditure. We hope you support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else here in the room in support of Assembly Bill 266? All right, I do not see any, so let's go to the phones and see if we have anyone in support of Assembly Bill 266.
Thank you, Chair. To testify in support on Assembly Bill 266, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in support at this time.
Thank you. Do we have any callers in opposition to Assembly Bill 266?
Thank you, Chair. To testify in opposition on Assembly Bill 266, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. Do we have anyone in neutral on Assembly Bill 266?
Thank you, Chair. To testify in neutral on Assembly Bill 266, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you. And with that, we can close the hearing on Assembly Bill 266. Thank you, Assemblywoman Miller. And we can now move to Assembly Bill. I have messed this up 10 different times in the last 24 hours, and I'll get it right. Assembly Bill 349. And I know Assemblyman Watts is headed down here right now. And he just sent a conceptual amendment, and I think we need to get that. Mr. Thorley, did you get that? I think I just sent it to you.
Yes, I did, Mr. Chair. Committee staff is posting that on Nellis as we speak. It's up.
It's already up? Wow, that was quick. Committee staff is on fire. And we are reviewing the amendment right now, and while we wait for Assemblyman Watts to get down here, and as soon as he gets here, we'll open that hearing up. Yes, sir. So we will open the hearing on Assembly Bill 349, and we will start with you, Assemblyman Watts. If you want to, and we have your amendment, and we posted it on Nellis already, and we're reviewing it right now. If you want to briefly talk about what the bill does and what the conceptual amendment would do to the bill, and then we'll talk about any fiscal impacts.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I am Howard Watts, representing Assembly District 15 in Clark County. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present Assembly Bill 349 for your consideration today. The primary focus of this bill is to reduce vehicle pollution in our state, but it'll also deliver benefits to our climate, our health, and our economy along the way. This is an important issue. American Lung Association has repeatedly found that Clark and Washoe counties have some of the highest air pollution in the nation. These pollutants are closely linked to health ailments including asthma, COPD, cancer, and even cognitive decline. And those impacts have disproportionately impacted certain communities, including lower income communities and communities of color. AB 349 looks to address this in a couple of ways. First of all, the early sections of the bill close what's kind of known as the Classic Car Loophole. I'm sure many of us have seen in our communities vehicles that have classic vehicle plates but are not hot August nights style vehicles. And the reason for this is that one of the main reasons this has proliferated over the last decade is because those plates are a way to avoid annual smog checks, and there's been issues with the current statutory structure to enforce the mileage limit of 5,000 miles per year that is supposed to apply to these vehicles. So this bill looks to close that loophole. It particularly does it by requiring classic vehicles to have a classic vehicle insurance policy, which comes with additional requirements and helps create the additional accountability to allow the true hobbyist vehicles, almost all of which have these policies. They're actually very beneficial to true classic car owners. They'll be able to continue operating as they do, while closing the loophole for others that are kind of abusing the system. In addition, it makes some modernization to our smog check system itself. Currently, a brand new vehicle is exempt from smog checks for 2 years. This bill increases that to 3 years. There have been proposals to go even further. Other states have biennial check systems or longer initial periods without smog checks being required, because those newer vehicles are much less likely to have smog problems and fail a check. However, in conversations with the industry and other stakeholders, we decided that just going from 2 to 3 was something that would, again, allow millions of dollars to stay collectively in the pockets of Nevada families instead of having to be spent on smog checks that don't necessarily lead to a significant reduction in air pollution. In addition, the bill, towards the end, the final sections, looks to make investments to help lower income people, particularly who've gone into the classic car system because they can't afford to fix a smog program, to be able to stand up a program to help repair or replace those vehicles. So either getting essentially a voucher or coupon that would cover the cost of a repair, or providing a quote-unquote cash on the hood incentive, kind of a cash for clunker program to replace older polluting vehicles with newer vehicles, whether those are newer gasoline burning vehicles, hybrids, or electric vehicles. And this is modeled on a similar, very successful program in the San Joaquin Valley. So that is at a high level what the bill seeks to do, and the mechanism for that is authorizing counties with populations above 100,000 to impose an additional fee. We have a state fee that's associated with the smog check. This would authorize counties to impose a supplemental amount and direct that to fund these programs. And the bill, as it was just amended, directs at least 50% of that investment into historically underserved communities, as has been defined in other pieces of legislation. So with that, I'll speak very briefly to the conceptual amendment. First, the amendment proposes to strike the proposed changes in Section 9, Subsection 4. This is around waivers that are granted for smog for people doing self-repair. In Clark County, those self-repair isn't an option. Repairs have to be done by a emission station. And in conversation with the county, that is actually part of their state implementation plan under the Clean Air Act. So changing those requirements could jeopardize our Clean Air Act compliance. So that's why those changes are being suggested for removal. In addition, we propose striking the language in Section 6 and amending the language in Section 7. Basically, in conversations with the industry, whenever a smog technician works for a chain, basically, each additional location they want to work at, they have to pay an additional fee. It's currently $10. That was described as a potential barrier to some of the employees and some of the small businesses. This bill sought to eliminate that entirely. In conversations with the DMV, there were some compliance issues brought up. So instead, what we're doing is limiting it to no more than $2 for each additional location to reduce that financial burden, but still maintain the compliance mechanism. And this is actually in line with practices in the fee structure in California. And then finally, we're striking Section 8 of the bill, which relates to authorizing the DMV to develop a remote sensing, an option instead of going into a smog station. There would be essentially high-tech cameras that could detect emissions as vehicles are driving down roadways and report that data. It's something that I think there's a lot of interest in, but there was also some concerns about the accuracy of the deployment here in the United States, and I think it's an idea worth considering, but I don't know if its time is quite here yet. So we propose to take that out to pare down the bill a little bit. So that's high-level overview of the bill and amendment. Thanks for the time, and happy to answer any questions that you have, and as well as go into the fiscal aspects.
Thank you, Assemblyman Watts. I have a couple of questions before we get into that, and it's about the fiscal note. And does anything? There's probably about 10 different areas where this bill touches DMV and has a fiscal impact. Is there anything in your amendment that changes that, to the best of your knowledge, before we get to DMV?
Thank you for that question, Chair Brooks. Howard Watts for the record. So I'd just note a couple things from the last version of the fiscal note submitted by the DMV was based on modifying our state fee structure. So you'll see there was significant revenue coming in that last fiscal note. Since the latest amendment does not have any state fee changes, but instead authorizes counties, those pieces of revenue are gone. The proposal around the change, basically point 2 in the conceptual amendment, one of the items in the DMV's fiscal note projects essentially a loss of $8,000 per year for those inspector licenses for additional locations. So it will be slightly less because instead of eliminating it, we're bringing it down from $10 to $2. And then they did have, I believe, $5,000 in regulatory costs around looking at the remote sensing program. Those costs, I believe, would also be removed by item number 3 in the proposed conceptual amendment. However, I think the rest, including one of the first items, is projected additional revenue by bringing vehicles that are currently not in the smog check system back online by closing the loophole. That additional revenue projection would be maintained.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions from the committee for Assemblyman Watts? Excuse me. Before we try to see if we have DMV, Senator Dennis.
Just to, and I know this isn't the policy committee, but I didn't get a chance to hear it there. So, how does this impact folks that drive older vehicles that are lower income? Because that would be a concern for me, that people that depend on transportation to get to work and things, that may not be able to do everything that might be required by the bill.
Thank you very much for the question, Senator Dennis. Through you, Mr. Chair. Howard Watts for the record. That was a key issue and consideration for me as well. The last thing, I want to close this loophole. I think it's right that everyone plays by the same set of rules, but I do understand that a lot of the folks who have taken advantage of the program as it currently stands are lower income and could see negative consequences as a result. So that's why I worked to include that revenue piece that I discussed. And we also have the changes to the classic car plates implemented at a slightly later date so that we could stand up the revenue generation and those repair and replace programs, so that the way I envision it, number one, at a bare minimum, as these cars no longer qualify for classic vehicle status, they would be able to essentially get a voucher. So if their vehicle can't pass smog, they can get the average cost of a repair covered. And under our existing law, if they make that investment and it still does not pass, they get a waiver from the smog requirements. So that's one of the ways that we're looking to mitigate that economic impact. The other way is trying to actually create a pool of funds that helps people transition into newer, cleaner vehicles. And that's something that I'm really excited about. Lower income people may have difficulty accessing those newer vehicles, but we know that older vehicles not only emit more pollution, but they're more costly to maintain. So ultimately, by providing something that can help people move up a little bit into something that's cleaner, and particularly hybrids or electric, they could also reduce their ongoing maintenance costs as well. So that's what I looked to do to address that impact as well as the implementation timeline. And my belief is that as the bill currently stands, it provides both health and economic benefits to lower income communities and the communities most in need.
So then on the other side of that, how does this impact the folks that are either the hobbyists or the folks that collect cars and fix them up?
Thank you for that question, Senator Dennis. Howard Watts for the record. So really all this changes is that for these, we have a few designations for classic vehicles. Now we have some that are for pre-1940s and extremely old vehicles. We're not touching those at all because really those are antique and classic vehicles. We have 3 different designations that essentially have a rolling timeline. And the earliest is 20 years. So right now, 2000, 2001 model year vehicles qualify for classic car status. And there's not really any boundaries around that. So what we're doing is, first of all, saying these vehicles can't be used as your commercial vehicle. I've seen some trucks and other things that are clearly being used for daily business purposes. So we're clarifying that in the statute. And then we're requiring that these vehicles have classic car insurance. For people that are true hobbyists, they usually have this because, one, you get an appraisal for the vehicle. Usually your premiums are reduced because it's not out all the time. You're only using it at special events, so that the risks to that vehicle are generally decreased. And if something happens, you have an agreed upon value of the vehicle, which is different than kind of how our general insurance works. So, will I say that 100% of classic vehicle enthusiasts are in support of it? Perhaps not, but many of the folks that I've talked to say they already have these policies and it makes complete sense for them and won't actually have any impact on how they operate.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Assemblyman Watts from the committee? We have, I don't see any, so I want to go to, I think we have Mr. Decker from the DMV on the Zoom, and I have a few questions about the fiscal note.
Good morning, Chair. J.D. Decker for the record.
Good morning, Mr. Decker. Good to see you. I'm looking at the fiscal note here. I have it, and it's the, I want to make sure I've got the right one. It would be the Department of Motor Vehicles fiscal note based on the first reprint. And so does the first reprint, does the bill in its current form, which I think is on its second reprint, right? Does the second reprint that we have in front of us, and we'll talk about the conceptual amendment in a second, but the second reprint, does your fiscal note that you made based on the first reprint, do you think that accurately encompasses the bill as it currently stands, second reprint?
J.D. Decker for the record, Chief of the Compliance Division for DMV. My admissions people are telling me that it reduces the $6,000 loss in revenue to $4,800 currently. So it reduces our loss in revenue.
Thank you. But you feel that the increased revenues from are probably the same?
J.D. Decker, for the record, Chair, as far as we know, the increased revenues are the same as we predicted in the initial fiscal note. There's reduced programming costs and a reduction in the loss of revenue. The option for counties to make up the difference through their own means, because ultimately that revenue gets passed through a couple checkboxes until it reaches the county. Thank you.
All right. And then have you seen the conceptual amendment that Assemblyman Watts is speaking of?
J.D. Decker, I have not seen it, but my admissions people have reviewed it and briefed me on their ticket.
So I'm looking at the fiscal note that was the unsolicited from the first reprint, And it appears as if, and I'm not necessarily tracking this, I think, very well, but it looks as if that this fiscal note is for a $9.6 million increase in revenue.
Mr. Chair, if I might briefly step in, Howard Watts for the record, and then I'd ask Mr. Decker to please step in and correct me if anything I say does not line up with their interpretation. So the first reprint of the bill modified various state fees related to our smog program. The second reprint eliminated all of those proposed changes and instead authorizes the counties to implement a supplemental fee in those areas. So there's a large multi-million-dollar revenue line in the unsolicited fiscal note. That no longer applies. I believe the first line in the unsolicited fiscal note references additional revenue by closing the Classic Car Loophole, and I believe that would still apply. And then, as Mr. Decker noted, there's a slight reduction in their projected loss of revenue due to the changes in item number 2 of the conceptual amendment related to the inspector licensing. And I believe the last line in the unsolicited fiscal note related to regulatory development is eliminated through item 3 in the conceptual amendment, which strikes the remote sensing regulatory option from the bill.
Thank you. So still net positive after all those changes.
JD Decker for the record. That is correct.
All right. And, go ahead, Assemblyman.
My apologies. Thank you, Chair. Howard Watts for the record. One thing that I think Mr. Decker was also saying, but it might have cut out briefly, is that the way that a lot of these programs work is that, or our smog emissions program, is the state collects these fees, they use them to administer the program, and then the excess goes to the counties, basically, for air quality programs. So a couple of these areas, even where there is a loss, essentially that loss is of a few $1,000s. It comes to the counties, not actually to the state. So I just wanted to get that on the record. And then, of course, the counties would have the ability to collect supplemental revenue.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the committee to Mr. Decker from DMV? All right. I do not see any, so I appreciate that. Any other questions from the committee to Assemblyman Watts? All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. So thank you, Mr. Decker. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining us this morning. And I will see if we have anyone in the audience that is in support of Assembly Bill 349. All right, I do not see anyone in the audience in support of 349. If we have anyone in support, on the phones in support of Assembly Bill 349.
Thank you, Chair. To testify in support on Assembly Bill 349, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 155, please press star 6 to unmute. Thank you, caller. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Chair Brooks and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christy Cabrera, CHRISTI-CABRERA, and I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for the Nevada Conservation League. AB 349 is a priority of the Nevada Conservation Network, a diverse coalition of over 20 of our state's leading conservation and environmental groups. The Nevada Conservation Network came over around a focused set of 5 priority bills for the 2021 session, all of them strong steps for advancing conservation and the protection of Nevada's environment. AB 349 would help us make progress towards our state's ambitious goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions to reach net zero by 2050. By removing some of the dirtiest smog-producing cars from our roads and making clean energy alternatives available, we can lower Nevada's emission levels and put ourselves in a better position to meet our climate goals. This bill is a critical step in fighting the climate crisis that works to improve air quality and public health. It checks 2 boxes from the state's climate strategy report: closing the Classic Car Loophole and funding a program to help more families make the switch to an electric vehicle. We'd like to thank Assemblyman Watts for bringing this bill forward, and we strongly urge the committee support. Thank you for your time.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 386. Please press star 6 to unmute. Caller with the last 3 digits, 386. Please press star 6 to unmute. Thank you, caller. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Rudy Zamora, and I am the Program Director for Chispa, Nevada. I am here today not only on behalf of Chispa, Nevada, but also the dozen of other groups who support AB 349. AB 349 is an important solution that would address the older, more polluting vehicles on our roads by closing the Classic Car Loophole. And that would provide a pathway for low-income communities who are mostly harmed by unhealthy air to access cleaner forms of transportation, either by repairing or replacing their vehicle with assistance from county programs. This latter component is critical to make sure we do not leave low-income Nevadans without transportation, as we make sure cars on our roads can pass mock checks. As you can see from the exhibits for this bill, this includes groups across equity, health, businesses, conservation, as well as Clark and Washoe counties and their air quality and health departments. We hope you will join thousands of Nevadans who are asking for cleaner air to breathe by supporting AB 349. Thank you.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 836. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Jessica Ferrato, Jessica Ferrato. Today on behalf of Ceres in support of AB 349. Ceres runs the BICEP network, which is a coalition of nearly 70 major employers. Their members recognize that climate change poses a significant risk to the long-term economic success of the business community and have set goals to reduce their emissions. Just as transportation is now the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Nevada, vehicle fleets are often a substantial component of their carbon footprint, as well as a major operating expense. Clean vehicles help businesses create financial savings and minimize the risks associated with fuel costs, maintenance downtime, and supply volatility. Importantly, our members and business partners support policies that accelerate the transition to clean transportation options, not only because it helps their bottom line, but because it benefits their employees, customers, and the communities they operate in. Ceres submitted a letter to the committee signed by 6 businesses and institutions highlighting their support for legislative action that accelerates the transition to low-emission and zero-emission vehicles, and are here in strong support of AB 349. Thank you for your time.
Once again, we are currently on support testimony on Assembly Bill 349. If you would like to testify in support, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no additional callers in support at this time.
Thank you. Do we have anyone in opposition to Assembly Bill 349? Well, okay, we have some folks here in the room. Come on up to the table. You can state your name and go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Finance Committee, Peter Kruger with representing the Nevada Emission Testers Council this morning. Since this is a money committee, I'll address only the Amendment 690, Section 10.5, whereas they initially removed the funding and put a provision in that county commissions could adopt. We're not addressing that. Our concern is the pollution control account. As you may know, what is the $6 certification or cert fee that's currently in place, as I read the amendment, would remain in place. However, the bill in its original form and in the amended form ends up removing one model year of vehicles. Currently, vehicles that are 2 model years and newer are not subject to emission testing. This would extend that to a 3rd model year. That's approximately 70,000 cars in the state, and that figure represents in money to the pollution control count about $500,000, 400 and about 50,000 if I'm correct. That money would be lost as I read this amendment. So why that's important to the industry is that those dollars that go to TRPA, DMV, the Department of Agriculture, and others are used to help the emissions program, enhance programming, enhance computer enhancements for us. So therefore, addressing only the money piece, the loss of revenue would negatively impact, we believe, the Clean Air Program, and without that money to be retained, the $6 is there, but when you add a model year, you lose a model year, that's about $450,000 thing. So we are opposed to that provision because the pollution control count is not held harmless. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kruger. I appreciate that. Go ahead. Push the button, please, sir.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Ed Euling. I'm just happen to be here in the committee. To me, this looks like one more money grab by the government. $19 million more out of the private sector into the public sector. And it's really a solution in search of a problem. I don't think Senator Dennis's concerns were adequately answered by the people here who testified. There are a lot of people who have to use old cars and to get to work, simply to get to work, and contribute to the economy of the state. If you look, I say it's a solution in search of a problem because if you look and think about 20 years ago, what was going on in the valley and in Las Vegas, it was extremely polluted. There was always a dark cloud over the city all winter long. That has been removed, or that's been taken away. And of the pollution, how much of the pollution is dust? We live in the middle of a desert. That happens. Also, I just heard on the radio today that Ford or General Motors, I've forgotten which, is expecting that 50% of the cars that they produce by the year 2030, 8.5 years from now, are going to be electric. So this problem is going to disappear in time. China has already declared that all cars by a certain time are going to be electric cars, and we're headed in that direction also. So and if it's really a problem, they're really concerned about these old cars. Why don't they use some of the money coming from the federal government to do another clunker, purchase of the clunkers that like President Obama did, and eliminate these cars? Let me just tell you a personal experience. We bought a Land Rover that we simply could not find the cause of not passing the smog test. We spent probably $2,000. We bought the car for $2,000. We spent $2,000 trying to find the cause, and then we had to spend another $400, which is not an insignificant amount for a lot of people, to go to an official garage and have them just waste $400 of mechanic time so that we could get the exemption for that car. Eventually, we took it to New Mexico and sold it in an auction. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day. Do we have anyone else here in opposition to Assembly Bill 349? All right, I don't see anyone, so could we go to the phones, please, and see if we want to have anyone in opposition to Assembly Bill 349?
Thank you, Chair. To testify in opposition on Assembly Bill 349, please press star 9 to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 760, please press star 6 to unmute. Thank you, caller. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Yes, my name is Rafael Arroyo, Rafael, last name Arroyo. And I'm actually a mission station owner here in Las Vegas Valley. And while I'm testifying in opposition, I do support the closing of the Classic Car Loophole. I think that's a really good thing. But the reason that I'm testifying in opposition is because of the small business impact that this is going to have, especially on the smaller businesses. A fee increase, if it's put through by the Clark County Commissioners or in Washoe as well, I guess, is really going to impact the smaller people that only own maybe 1 station or 2 stations a lot more than a big chain. A big chain is going to be able to, maybe pass on some of the cost to the consumer, but they won't pass on all of it because they know that they're going to be at a competitive advantage. They can absorb that hit, while the person that only owns 1 station is going to try to pass all of that fee increase onto a consumer, and then they're going to, their prices are going to be, higher than these big chains. So it really just hurts small businesses. And, I think that's the biggest impact. Also, while I do think that the intentions are good for eliminating a 3rd model year as far as saying, hey, you can free up some revenue and get that back into the economy. The problem with freeing up that revenue from that 3rd model year, apart from the damage that it does for the state budget, but just in general, is that money, instead of it being spent at a small locally owned business, they're going to spend it at a Starbucks or McDonald's or, one of these bigger corporations. So you're taking that money again, that goes into the local economy, and you're dispersing it amongst these bigger businesses. So, I just really think that the small business impact is something that really has to be studied here, because that's what's going to bring, Nevada out of this, out of this kind of rut that we're in here. We have to support the small businesses or the economy is going to fall apart. Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Next caller in opposition, please.
Thank you, Chair. We are in opposition testimony on Assembly Bill 349. If you would like to testify in opposition, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no more callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. Do we have anyone in a neutral position to Assembly Bill 349 on the phones?
Thank you, Chair. To testify in neutral on Assembly Bill 349, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 725, please press star 6 to unmute. Thank you, caller. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, I guess afternoon, members of the committee, Chair Brooks. For the record, this is Andrew McKay, Andrew Mackay. I'm the executive director of the Nevada Franchise Auto Dealers Association. If you can pardon my faux pas in advance, Mr. Chair, in that I was late on the uptake and had intended on testifying in favor of this matter. There is conceptual amendment that is out there. We have not had time to review that, but I wanted to be sure to put on the record that with respect, mirroring our remarks in prior committee hearings on this bill, we're supportive of what Assemblyman Watts is attempting to do. And I think it's important to note that when you look in terms of changing the frequency of the smog checks from the first 2 years to 3, that is consistent with, or I should rather say, pardon me, it makes Nevada somewhat consistent with our neighboring states here in the West. And then further, as it relates to the Classic Car Loophole, again, we cannot thank Assemblyman Watts enough for tackling this. 4 years ago, as the committee may be aware of, they did a deep dive, actually it was 5 years ago, and to analyze just the entire emissions testing, and that is a serious problem that's needed to be taken care of, and we applaud him. So again, Mr. Chair, I apologize about jumping in the inappropriate section of the meeting, but I wanted to make sure I got our comments on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. We will note you as in support. And do we have anybody on the phones in the neutral position?
Thank you, Chair. We are currently on neutral testimony on Assembly Bill 349. If you would like to testify in neutral, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Decker, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or are you ready, or can we shut down the meeting for today?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. J.D. Decker, for the record, Chief of the Compliance Enforcement Division. I wanted to clarify my answer to your original question, if I may, in whether the fiscal note leads us to be net positive. We are actually net negative. However, with the provision for the counties to make up the difference, officially in the bill, we would be net negative with an option to essentially be net neutral in the end. And I just wanted to take that opportunity to clarify that. Thank you.
I appreciate you clarifying that, and if you could summarize that in an email for the record, based upon the amendment that I know I don't know if you've had a chance to fully look at it with your team yet. If you could do that for us, that would be great.
Will do. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So I think that wraps up everything for this hearing on Assembly Bill 349. And we will recess until the call of the chair. And we have a special presentation on the floor today at 11:15. So we'll run over to the floor and get started.